Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vanessa Lambert. I am a coordinating producer for Bally Sports, the region down in Florida. I oversee 3 of our professional teams in market. Previously spent a lot of time in the TV producing world, covering all sports, leagues, teams, all kinds, in Minneapolis for about 15 years. So have spent most of my life in the sports realm. I am happy to be joined today by Dr. Allison Barber, who a lot of you probably know. She is the president and COO of the Indiana Fever. She is in her 6th season with the Fever, and let me tell you, she has had a variety of roles in her life. She started out as a grade school teacher. She worked at the White House and with the Department of Defense. She also was a chancellor at a university here in the state of Indiana. So quite the story, and as having a great opportunity to lead the Fever for the last few years. I'm also joined by Ashley Kelly down there at the end. She is the head of sponsorship and engagement marketing with Allstate Insurance, which she has done for a while. we won't age ourselves with years or anything like that. She manages the sports and branded entertainment sponsorships and promotional programming for Allstate and some of the sports and teams that they sponsor. She's previously worked on the agency side with a variety of companies, Target, Motorola, Kraft, you name it. And we are all Midwesterners, so happy to be back in an area we love a lot. Our panel is about what we like to call the Clarkonomics era, which obviously not only has to do with Allison's team, but obviously women's sports in general. So, Allison, if you want to start out, can you explain what the Clarkonomics era means to the economy of women's sports?
Yes, I'm happy to. Thanks for having me. Since you mentioned that I first career was a school teacher, I'm going to do a little education in case anybody needs it. Because so many people think Clarkonomics is about Caitlin Clark. And it's in the newspapers and articles, and people talk to me about, the Caitlin Clarkonomics. And so I have to first remind everybody that Clarkonomics was created by a British historian in World War I whose name was Christopher Clark. And so Clarkonomics is really a methodology of looking at how events are interconnected and have an impact. So poor Christopher Clark, he has now been, taken over by Caitlin Clark, which is okay by me. And you can get yourself exited from any bar room if you start talking about the British historian instead of Caitlin Clark. So we will move on. But Clarkonomics really does apply to what we're experiencing in women's sports. Christopher Clark, the historian, said World War I didn't break out because of just one thing. There are several things in society that have to interconnect to make a movement happen. And thankfully, the Caitlin Clark moment is really interconnected to many events that have happened in women's sports, really since 1972, which was the beginning of Title IX, as Hoosiers were very proud of Senator Birch Bayh, who penned Title IX. But what we're watching in women's sports is really anchored in this great energy around Caitlin, and happy to unpack some of those numbers. But what we're seeing is this movement that has really been on the rise for several years, and now there's this inflection point because of the other Clarkonomics.
She did say she'd school us, so thank you. Ashley,
Do you know Christopher Clark?
How many? I learned something new today, so hey.
Clark? No, right? I mean, poor guy. Yeah, poor guy.
Yeah, I think he'll be okay. Ashley, what are some of the more significant changes you've seen in the women's sports industry over the last few years?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, and I think a lot of it is accessibility. I think I think about even to my television set over the past few months. Anytime I turn on TV, there are women's sports on, whether it's the WNBA, NWSL, collegiate sports, softball, volleyball. You didn't get that even last year, even a few years ago. So I think the media landscape is shifting. There's still a huge gap. We need to continue chipping away at that. But I think now about 15% of the media landscape in sports covers women's sports, which trending upward. But I think you're seeing merchandise, and that's something huge. The different areas and facilities that are being built now for women's specific sports. On a personal level, I think my daughter plays basketball. Her team, she's 10, they practice at a facility where the Sky practices, which is our local rec center. like the Chicago Sky. They did just announce, though, they're building them a new facility. So I think these are the changes we're starting to see. So you have on the team level, you have on the fan level, you have, the accessibility again, the media, and then you're seeing these companies emerge. There's these first of a kind businesses like Just Women's Sports, Together, these media companies focused on women's sports. Again, 5-10 years ago, they weren't there. The women's sports were there, and they've been trucking along this whole time building for this moment. But I think it's pretty incredible to see what's taking off right now. And then, from a brand perspective, the more brands that are getting involved, they're activating, they're bringing their message to life, and they're helping, with funding too, which is, it's just a special time to be part of.
Ashley mentioned media, which is obviously a big thing, just the coverage. Allison, how have you seen the media rights and sponsorships change and kind of fuel the growth that we are in right now?
We've watched a lot of growth happen in the WNBA. We're 27 years old, I think, in the W. And so we saw this even last year. Interest in the WNBA was up 32% from the previous year. And so we have, the numbers will blow your mind coming up when we can do our research and look back from this year. But even 22 to 23, we saw a growth in viewership and interest. It's and then partnership, and I'm happy to explain some of the numbers with having Aaliyah Boston, our #1 pick last year from South Carolina, who took the Fever onto a new trajectory, and then now with Caitlin, which has just exploded, as most people know, except for Christopher Clark. And I'm happy to explain those numbers. But from 22 to 23, the growth was really impressive, and the viewership is amazing. And so just a nugget. My team went to visit Ascension, the NICU, last week. A couple players went to visit moms and dads and their babies. We were there for 60 minutes, and we had 1 million views on that digital content for that one piece. And I said to my digital team, if we did that last year, how many views did we get? And they said, generously speaking, we probably got about 15,000 views. And so the interest is just growing and growing and growing. We had 3 players in the WNBA All-Star this year. We had 34 million views to our content, more than any other WNBA team, the other WNBA teams combined. And so you do have this attraction to the Fever, which we're humbled by, honestly. It's the little secret in sports is you had to be kind of bad to get the first pick. And so on a business standpoint, there are certain business principles I really can't stand. The one you do, you're in business. What gets you to $1 million won't get you to $2 million. That there's a book, there's a principle. I hate that because I know how to get to $1 million, and now I have to learn something new to get to 2. So in sports, you kind of have to have a losing record, sadly, to get the first pick. And we did, and so that works. But the growth and this inflection point is something we've been building for, and I think that's the business model of the WNBA, is that it's what our coach says to our players. They're on the bench, they're at the end of the bench, so they're not the starters. And my coach says to those players all the time, and they probably say it to your daughter, is be ready. When the coach calls your number, be ready. And so on a business standpoint, it was the same thing. How did we develop relationships with partners? Corporate sponsors. Our corporate partnerships are up 245%. #1 team in women's sports for partners. But we had to have those relationships. And so how could we be ready for an inflection point like Caitlin? So that's what we're watching. And some of the numbers, I had to write them down because they're just ridiculous and I wouldn't remember. So there are the fans for corporate sponsors. If you're a company, why would you invest? I think it's a little bit in women's sports. 54%. So of people that are fans of women in sports, 54% are more aware of the sponsors of women's sports. And in the WNBA, that number is 131% of the fans are more likely to buy your product if you sponsor their team. I mean, that's just makes sense. It's a good business model. So this is the growth we're seeing.
Yeah. Ashley, to further that point, what for you, in your mind, in your company, what makes women's sports such an appealing investment?
Yeah, I think obviously there is just this, new audiences, new market, trying to tap into these new audiences. But I think more so you're also helping transform women's sports and equity and whatnot within the U.S. So I think that's very interesting too. I think in women's sports, when you look at the women's sports fan, they're into the gameplay, they're into the highlights, they're into all of that, but they're also, the fan is into the storytelling behind the scenes, getting to know these players. And I think there's such rich content and storytelling opportunities with players, with teams, as you're talking about, Allison, your numbers against your content. I think there's just such a way to connect your brand message with the fans and, really drive your business in a way you haven't been doing it before. And now you have this new audience along with the audience you've currently, have through your, let's say through college football, who are also now watching women's sports. So it's really an interesting way to message to new fans, to your current fans, and drive our business.
How do you guys measure your success then?
So we measure our success based on consideration. We do a lot with brand lift studies, our ROI. We're really from a sports standpoint that, high level brand awareness. We want to bring everybody in. And then, like I said, really a lift in consideration shows success for our programming.
Allison, you mentioned Caitlin Clark.
Mm-hmm.
What strategic decisions has your organization made to capitalize on her popularity?
Well, we thought we made the right decision by buying every jersey made in America before draft night, which was 10,000 jerseys, and then we sold all those out. So we gave it our best shot. Strategy-wise, is we've actually put the pieces in place over the last 5 years to be ready for growth. Nobody really can capture this unprecedented moment of growth. Everybody wants to compare Caitlin to this player, that player, and I'm here to tell you there is no comparison. There might be this one thing or that one thing. There is no comparison. And I've met with a lot of people to try and figure that out, and there is just nothing. So how do you prepare for this unprecedented inflection point? You build your base, you build your internal team. After COVID, we brought in a whole new team of people that were ticket sales. When Caitlin announced that she was going to go pro on Thursday at 4:22, by Sunday we had over 6,000 phone calls of people asking to buy tickets. 6,000 phone calls. So you have to have a team that can handle that. And thankfully, we're part of Pacer Sports and Entertainment, and all of the Pacer ticket salespeople came over to help us return all those phone calls. So you put your best team together to be ready for the moment, and then you double down and you adapt. Over the Olympic break, we changed out our POS system in our team store so that we could service more customers in real time with, better technology. And sure, we had that in mind and we were going to do it, but we had to, speed it up. Our jersey sales, and this is April to July, our jersey sales have gone up 1,193%. Like, you can't really even plan for that. So, on weekends, I'm downstairs sewing almost. I mean, that's how it feels. Like, let's go. And if any of you can stitch, let me know. So that is putting the technology in place, the people in place. We hired a new digital team a year and a half ago. So just having the right people that we knew where we were going to go. If I would have been on this panel 2 years ago, I would have been sharing with you the vision of where the Fever were going to go, the impact on kids. Basketball is the #1 sport to develop psychological well-being. Think about that. What do we suffer with in America today with kids? What do they suffer from? Psychological well-being. 3 million children are dealing with depression in our country today. What does the Cleveland Clinic says about how do you mitigate that? Physical exercise. So I would be saying this to you and to people who would listen 2 years ago and 3 years ago because the facts were the same, but people weren't paying attention to the WNBA and the Fever 2 and 3 years ago. And so this platform of how do we prepare for this moment, I wrote a document that said when Caitlin came out, the first thing, I used to work at the Pentagon, and Secretary Rumsfeld, when we'd have something big come up and you'd be prepping and doing all of the important things that you would hope everybody at the Pentagon would do on your behalf as a taxpayer. And we would work hours after hours and be ready, and we're just getting ready to launch a new initiative or do this big event for our troops. And Secretary Rumsfeld would look at me and he'd say, now, don't screw it up. Like, that was his tip. That was his coaching advice. So this season, that was kind of our mantra, like, don't mess this moment up. But immediately penned a document about how do we now maximize on this momentum. You know, sports goes through these cycles, ups and downs, and if you're actually on the team, you kind of understand. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, and that's part of it. But as leaders in this organization and in sports, your job, all of our jobs, is to maximize this momentum, because if we just sit back, it will lose it.
So how do you build your brand and continue that growth over the long term?
The brand of the Fever?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I remember when I first got this job, I went to a bar by the field house, and it was the Fever season, not bitter, it's the Fever season, and up on the wall they had the Chicago Cubs schedule. And I said, oh, would you ever think about putting the Fever schedule up there? And they're like, well, what's the Fever? I'm like, I'm going to jump off of a low bridge. I wouldn't do a high bridge because you would get hurt, but the drama of a jump would probably feel really good in that moment. I couldn't believe it. But then we kept working on it, went all 92 counties to try to build awareness. And that is the trick, I think, in sports, is that it's like business too. This is not a new model. You can't sell a ticket until you build awareness. So how do we build awareness for the Fever so that people understand that there is a women's professional sports team in Indiana? Now we have a volleyball team. We're super excited about it. They start in January. Fishers, buy your tickets. They're on sale. Indy Ignite. So how do you build your momentum? And then all of a sudden, when we've been doing this, and all of our data shows that last year was better than the year before for the Fever, the momentum is building, and then this inflection point that we talk about. And then all of a sudden, you have to pivot to say, my brand, and I'm okay with it, my brand might be stepping back a minute because Caitlin's brand is stepping forward. And then it's it's your brand rub. Sometimes you lead, and sometimes you're at the side, and sometimes you're behind. But it's okay because it advances women's sports and the league. And so every situation is different. But for us, we show up in a big way with Caitlin, and for our partners. We're really grateful for Salesforce and Lilly as our partners. Cheez-Its, great new partner for us. And so that's how we build our brand, is really a little bit of Caitlin leads sometimes and we lead sometimes, and figuring that out. And our other great players, Aaliyah and Kelsey. I mean, we've got terrific players.
Yeah. You mentioned Caitlin and kind of creating her own brand, which is also important in this athletic space. Ashley, the whole world of name, image, and likeness has changed that a lot. What has Allstate done to kind of capitalize on that, and in the college space too?
Yeah, so Allstate was actually the first brand to come in the NIL space with $1 million payment, sorry. But we weren't going to come in, it's still a little bit of the wild, wild west with NIL. It's definitely necessary. I think they're still figuring it out. But what Allstate, this is on the football side, but we have the Allstate AFCA Good Works team, and that is a group of football players, 11 from SBS, 11 from subdivisions, who are named to this team not for their gameplay, but for what they do off the field, for their community service. So these are guys that are playing at the highest level, but also finding time to give back in their local communities, overseas, whatever it may be. They're nominated, a big voting panel, and they get named to the team. So the way we decided to structure it in the first year was, instead of just signing on spokespeople or whatnot to run in an ad, Allstate's a very purpose-driven company. We thought, what if we were to pay our AFCA Good Works team players and then also match a donation back to their charities? So, in that first year where NIL, really was out there, we paid our players who made the team. And, they had to do, of course, do like a social post or whatnot, but they really were just being paid for the great work they're doing with a matching donation to their charities. So that was a great way for Allstate to get into it. We're continuing with that, moving forward with our Good Works team. We're looking at different ways to expand what we're doing. We're always monitoring NIL. We have some cool programming that is going to be coming soon, hopefully to touch on some other sports and spaces too in the collegiate space. But again, I think it's something we're all navigating, but something that it should be here, and we are looking for ways to continue to, from an Allstate perspective, do it in a way that feels right, that really benefits the players and the athletes, and hopefully programming will continue to grow. Mm-hmm.
How do you choose which players, which teams, which leagues to sponsor and work with?
Yeah, so at Allstate, for a very long time, we've been very rooted in college football and in soccer. And we are a brand that very much likes to go deep. We like to partner with someone and go deep and figure out, what drives us as a brand, what are our goals, what are our partners, and how do we then, come up with programming and messaging that really brings it to life in a meaningful way. So that's where we've been for a while. In the soccer space specifically, we are, excuse me, really we go in at the federation levels. We have, sponsorships with the men's and women's national team. We have MLS Next, which is their developmental program. And then at the grassroots level, we're partners with Sueño Alianza and Black Star, which are two different programs sponsoring underserved communities in Hispanic and Black youth. So we really see as a protection company, we say we're protecting the future of the game. So we're looking to see how can we really help that pipeline, help grow the sport overall and help provide those opportunities because it's such a pay-to-play model. So that's an example of, when we're evaluating where we should be and why, it's how again, can we bring our brand values and make an impact on what we're partnering, who we're partnering with to really, try to, put our stamp on the game. We are continuously evaluating other partnerships. There's a lot of stuff we're looking to do more in the women's space. We're pretty proud of what we've done to this point, but there is so much more untapped potential and opportunities for us that we're always evaluating new partnerships and looking to see how we can grow as a brand too and continue to make an impact.
I'll start with Ashley, but both of you can answer this. Where have you seen the biggest shift in demographics as far as fan engagement? Ashley could be more so overall, and maybe Allison just more so, within this women's sports WNBA kind of bubble.
Yeah. So overall, with fan engagement in the women's sports, I think in women's sports you have like 43% of more women, far more than that consume male sports, I would say. And with this audience, there's just high, kind of as I was speaking to earlier, with the storytelling and really the content they're looking for and that engagement. I think there's a slightly different way you engage with this audience. And I think it's really that behind the scenes content. It's really getting, they say that a lot of women's sports fans really follow the athletes. So they're fans of teams, but they're really fans of those athletes. And these athletes build big brands for themselves. How you were talking, Allison, about that push and pull with Caitlin leading, the Fever leading. It's incredible what these athletes are doing and the connection that they have with their fans. And there's a lot of, hopefully Caitlin never leaves the Fever, but a lot of fans that are going to follow her, where in her career. And then you also are gaining fans for your team. So it's really that power that these athletes are bringing. And I think the way that you really want to engage with the consumers is in this storytelling, in that connection, making them feel like they're part of it and in it. And that's, I think, right now where one of the reasons why women's sports is really booming.
When we started the season, we were still flying commercial flights, and we now fly charter, which is really great and helpful. We're on our first flight, and I'm flying with the team, and the woman sitting next to me said, "Oh, who are you with?" I said, "The Fever," and she gasped. And she goes, "Is Caitlin on this plane?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "Could I get a picture with her? It's not for me. It's for my 91-year-old grandfather who never misses her games at Iowa." And that's when I knew we had shifted. So that the fan base for women in sport and the game of basketball it transcends all demographics across the board. And so, it's not just Caitlin. I think it's important. She's so spectacular, and I wish you could meet her. She is the nicest person, and what you see is what you get with Caitlin, and we're really proud and grateful that we get to shepherd her into this professional career because she's terrific. But somebody said to me, "Oh, yeah, when you walk through a restaurant or something, it's like you're with the Beatles." And I said, "Oh, no. Because your grandparents didn't like the Beatles because they had long hair." Like, I can't find a set that doesn't appreciate what Caitlin is doing for the game and who she is. And so in that way, that fan base is changing. People say a lot of times people go to the men's games to be seen. They go to the women's games to see each other. And so that is our foundation of sport. We're 25 years old at the Fever. We have fans who've been with us the whole time, and they are a community of people who love the players, the story, and they know the game. They're very smart about the game. But what we're watching now is that is growing and growing and growing into this broader demographic of fandom that says it transcends. When I first got my job, I wore a Fever lapel pin everywhere I went, a T-shirt, a lapel pin. My license plate says Go Fever because my job was to build the brand. And I would go someplace and they would say, I'd be checking out at a grocery store and they'd say, oh, do you work for the Fever? And I said to my husband, you know, if I wear an IU jacket, nobody asked me if I work for IU. But because so few people repped the Fever, they assumed I worked there. On draft day, we gave out T-shirts to everybody who came to the field house. So I had a T-shirt on that had Fever all over it for the draft day. And I'm walking through Nordstrom Rack, and somebody sees my T-shirt, and they say, cool shirt. And since we signed Caitlin, not one person has asked me if I work for the Fever when I wear our logo. And I think that tells you something about the change in culture and the brand awareness that she and my other players have brought to the Fever. But it's, you know, it's anecdotal, but it's fascinating.
So, Allison, I'm going to add to that really quick. So you're talking about the 91-year-old. I have, you know, where I really am seeing, I have young kids. And, you know, I was driving carpool. This was like between the draft and the women's tournament. And I have 3 9-year-old boys and 2 9-year-old girls in the car. And all they're doing is talking about women's basketball players. Stats, everything, where they're going to get drafted, what's going on. One of them, they had their head with a fade with her number in their hair. Like, these are like boys. And then my son, who's 7, his friends are all talking about it. Like, it's pretty incredible that, you know, you're driving and no mention of men's sports or the men's tournament that's going on at the same time. I think anyone you would stop on the street, I think I even, you know, read something on this, could have named probably 10 to 12 of the athletes in the March Madness, Women's March Madness. Obviously, Caitlin being one of them, but to your point, there's many athletes that are really performing at the highest level right now. And if you stop someone on the street, the men's Final Four this year, maybe 4 or 5, maybe? Like that's really what we're seeing right now. That's incredible.
Absolutely. Since we are at a tech conference, Allison, what role has, you know, the digital innovation and just kind of how things are changing played a role, I guess, not only for you guys in arena, but maybe outside the arena as well?
Well, it's interesting because the players are so engaged in their own digital space. And so what you find is that your brand grows with their brand. When I got this job 6 seasons ago, I said to somebody who was on our team at the time, can you ever imagine a scenario where you would build your brand and the Fever brand? Because the players were all about promoting themselves. And it was really just out of my own trying to, you know, learn about this environment. And the player said to me, well, no, I wouldn't consider that because you might trade me. And I said, well, that's a little bit like corporate America. Any day you could get, you know, an exit letter from your boss. This is not unusual. But I learned in that moment that the players think about their brand first and foremost. And so in the digital space, you need to be ready to adapt to that. And it's not a bad thing. It's just a new thing and a real thing. And I think because of NIL deals, players come out much smarter. I love it. When players came out into the WNBA and the Players Association give them their, you know, contracts to sign, which has been happening for all the years. This is the first time the players said, well, I need my lawyers to look at it. And everybody was like, what just happened? They have agents and lawyers because they had NIL deals, and they're smarter because of it. But all of that then makes the player cognizant of how do I show up in my digital space to make good on my corporate partnerships. So there's a new level of business acumen, I think, that we see happening. But the digital space really is the place to develop the players and the stories that people want to follow. We're thrilled at the WNBA. They just announced a $2.2 billion media rights deal. It's a 11-year deal, which is unheard of. Yes, thank you. And because of that, our players will get paid more money if they negotiate a good deal in the CBA, and that would be great for them too. But so much of that viewership, the storytelling is in the digital space. The viewership is still on television that people want to watch it on their, the way that they've always watched sports. So it's a combination of that.
Sports is definitely the one thing that people will consume live, which is huge. So, I mean, kudos to that TV deal for sure. I guess let's kind of look forward. Ashley, as women's sports continues to grow, what trends are you keeping an eye on?
Trends, there's so many. Again, as we mentioned, there's still so much untapped potential. I think trends, there's a lot. From a brand perspective, I'm always interested just to see who's doing what opportunities are there. How can we continue to activate, to grow, to drive our business, of course. And I think as we think through trends, expansion, I think the expansion strategies of our more lead WNBA, NWSL, the volleyball league you just mentioned, softball.
Ignite, tickets on sale.
Buy them there. So, I think when we think about expansion in our current leagues, in new leagues, flag football, there, just many sports that are getting out there. As we mentioned too, I think merchandise, there's a huge, potential in merchandise, both for sales. I think even today I saw Angel Reese just signed a shoe deal with Reebok. I think both from the players, you look at someone like Sabrina, who had Sabrina ones did very well. Huge stories that even the men were wearing them. There just hasn't been a shoe. There hasn't been something like that before. She just came out with her new shoe. Caitlin has a shoe deal. Just the deals and the just different ways, people can wear the gear. I think the merchandise is a huge area that we're going to continue to see grow. The facilities, as we mentioned, and I think just that digital space and these new companies that are going to be popping up and the tech behind things. I think those are the big areas I'm going to be keeping an eye on.
Allison, what would your message be to those looking to invest in this space that you're in?
Well, only invest in women's sport if you want to sell more product. If you want more visibility. I mean, the research is there. It really is a great partnership because the female fan is a loyal fan to partners, to sponsors. But more importantly, if you want to be a part and associated with something that's actually good for our country. I do appreciate, I used to be in politics, and so back a while ago, but now I find it kind of enjoyable that when we win a game or somebody on my team hits a big shot, to watch people high-five each other and celebrate, and nobody asks the person before they high-five them who they are going to vote for in November. Sports still brings people together. And so that is exciting, and I think any company or brand that wants to be associated with something that's doing good things in society as it relates to bringing people together, and then also doubling down and investing in inspiring children to think about what's next and what sports can do for them. Ernst & Young research, 92% of women in C-suites played sports. This is your next level of leadership and development. When I got this job, they were talking to me about we were going to be down on the circle, on Monument Circle, and do this big event and promote the fever. And we were giving out hand sanitizer with our logo on it. I said, let's not give out hand sanitizer. Our job is to inspire kids to get their hands dirty. Get your hands dirty. That would be helpful. Get off the screens, get your hands dirty. To which my marketing person said, but after their hands are dirty, they need to wash them, which let me know she had already purchased the hand sanitizer, and so we're going to spin it a little to make it okay for the purchase. But the point is, the future for kids, so clear in the research. So what I'm looking for in partnerships are people that believe in the full story of what sport and this platform can offer to kids, first and foremost because of my passion there, but also to just society in general. And I think we're finding great brands that understand the value of that and this really fun, on-ramp to conversations and community that happens, especially in sports.
I do want to leave some time for questions, so I'll ask you both one more, and you can both kind of chime in. What makes you most excited as you look to the future in women's sports?
Championship for the Fever.
Simple answer.
Yeah.
Hey, the league's expanding, the more opportunity, which is great. So,
yes,
yeah.
It is expanding and will continue to expand. I think we'll get the WNBA to 16 teams is the goal anyway, the stated goal. So that'll be good. But more cities, more women can get to play. But looking at the advancement of all of the professional sports leagues, I mean, look at the Olympics. More women won gold, medals from the U.S. This is happening, and it's good, and we've been working at it a long time. And so I'm excited about the next opportunities.
Ashley?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Just the opportunity, accessibility. As we talk about the youth, I think just thinking about even when I was a kid, just what they can see, what the opportunities now are incredible. They weren't there. So like looking at the world through my daughter's eyes when she watches sports and talks about sports and like you said, exercise, taking care of your body, but really seeing herself on TV or seeing what she could be. She's definitely not going to be an WNBA player, but she likes it. But I think just the opportunity of we see how far it's come. And I think when we think about the potential, it's endless. And I think just everyone needs to continue to get out and support it from the fan level, from the brand level, the media side, the leagues, the players. I just think there's such opportunity, and it's incredible when I think where we are. Like when it was the WNBA draft, I was in Atlanta for the She Believes Cup with U.S. Soccer, and the night before we're at a partner dinner, and everyone is wanting to get out of there to go watch the draft. I mean, we're all talking about where are we going for the after party to watch the draft is the conversation. And then from there, it was during the finals, sorry. But still another big night. Everyone was talking about where they were going to watch the games. and then the next day, walking into Mercedes-Benz Stadium with 55,000 people walking in to watch the U.S. women's national team. Like, it's just incredible to see where we are with women's sports. I had to, take a minute, step back, because I've been working in women's sports for a very long time. I've been going to WNBA games for a very long time, one of hundreds in a stadium. And now to go in and have these sold out games, it's incredible. So I just think, thinking where we are is pretty amazing, but where we can go and just the opportunities it's going to provide for so many people and so many different kind of industries and ways in is pretty amazing. And I'm excited to be part of the ride.
Awesome. Does anyone in the audience have any questions for Allison or Ashley? Christy wants to go first. All right, I'll MC down on the floor. Hold on 1 second. Of course. Oh, you have one too. Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, I got my movement power. Thank you.
Your rings are dinging.
Thanks all. Massive fan of women's sport, obviously. What's the path to profitability for the WNBA teams? Are any of the teams profitable today? Or how long do you think is that roadmap to get there?
You can find models that show profitability for a few teams. Typically, if you win a championship, your next year is your most profitable year. I think that's interesting. It's not the year of the championship, it's the following year. So several of the teams, there are 12. Of the 12 teams, 13 teams. Of the 12 teams that are current, 5 of them are partnered with an NBA team. So they're independent and NBA teams. So the independent teams have really had a deep level of commitment and haven't often been profitable yet. All of the pieces that are coming together with the incorporation of new partnerships and the media deal, I think the majority of teams will move toward profitability. But it's really been a great signal of people being dedicated to advancing this opportunity for women, that they're willing to take that risk and a lot of loss along the way to get to this moment. When we played in Atlanta, so some of the WNBA teams play in smaller venues. We're fortunate we play at Gainbridge, which is great. We sell out every night, 17,000 people. Last year, our best night, we had about 6,200. We did that 5 times. Now we're at 17,000 every game. We went to Atlanta. They have a small arena, and they went over to their NBA. They rented their NBA arena for the first time we came to play. They sold 17,000 seats, more than they've ever sell for their NBA team. And because they sold out, they sold 1,000 standing room only tickets. I walked into the arena and I look up, and around the top level it's like when you're at a shopping mall and you look down, 1,000 people are looking at the tops of our heads that night. And so each team is starting to recognize new profitability. And the good news is it's not just when Caitlin shows up or the Fever show up. They're starting to gain that momentum. So the future looks bright. But it's been a heavy lift. So I'm grateful to all the owners who have been willing to weather that financial storm to get to this moment.
I think you guys broke another record in Atlanta last night.
Yes, we did.
Vanessa, this question's actually for you.
Oh, Lydia.
So with your years at Fox Sports and Bally on the production side, are there any changes that you've had to make with this trajectory with the Clarkonomics era, like behind the scenes in the production side?
I think for me, so I spent 15 years in the Twin Cities and covered the Lynx and the Timberwolves, which the Lynx are obviously partnered with their NBA team. And I was fortunate enough to work some of their championship seasons. So I've touched that Tiffany trophy, lucky me. I think, you know, from a team perspective, working with the NBA partner helped them. You know, part of our, not to get too in the weeds, but part of our deal with the NBA side was to also cover the WNBA side. And so I think for us, you know, the challenge as the game, as the popularity has grown, you know, was to do those games justice, because, you know, as Allison said, some are profitable, some are not. And, you know, when you're kind of trying to figure out the finance piece of it, you know, you're trying to do some of it in a smart manner and figure out you know, sponsorships and things you can sell. So I think from our perspective, you know, as you know, we started covering the team, gosh, back in like 2008, and so more and more interest obviously changes kind of the way that you produce your games. You have more eyeballs on it. You're getting more sponsorships, which is huge. So I think, you know, it's trying to create your product the same as any other pro product that you would put out there on TV, and just kind of evolve with everything else that you're doing too. We have a few minutes left. There's a question right over there.
So the NWSL is doing away with its draft. How do you think a similar move could impact the WNBA if it were to follow suit? You've been great beneficiaries of the draft over the last few years.
That's
It
an
really
understatement.
changes the landscape, doesn't it?
It does. I haven't followed that and have not heard of any hint that the WNBA would move to that direction, so I'm not sure. But we have benefited from the draft. 2 first picks back to back. Still have the bruises to show for it. It's a tough way to get to a winning team, but it's part of the process, and we welcome it.
Any other questions? It's hard to see with the lights in my face. Well, thank you all for coming. Are you a Hoosier? Did you go to Indiana? Okay. I just noticed that we're all kind of wearing our school colors in Big Ten country here.
Go blue.
Go green. And we got a Hoosier in the middle. So thank you all for joining us. If you are in town tomorrow, I know you keep pushing volleyball, but hey, we're sold out, but we do have a game in town down the
right.
street.
Yeah, it'll be a
So
good game
y'all
tomorrow
can
night,
go see
Fever game.
Caitlin Clark in person. And Allison will be there with bells on welcoming everyone. So thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you.